What if everything you've been told about achieving success is wrong? Over my 11 years as both an internationally published researcher in the behavioral sciences, as well as a successful entrepreneur, I've discovered that most of the advice out there on strategic thinking and goal achievement isn't actually consistent with what the clinical evidence shows. And in this video, I'll share 3 steps for strategic thinking I've learned over the past 11 years that you can actually use to achieve the life you desire. And the first step is to focus on the negative. Now, I bet you've probably heard the cliche in self-help that you should stay positive and dream big in order to achieve your most ambitious goals. But the truth is, if we're ever going to actually achieve our goals, we need to instead learn how to be clear thinkers and see reality as it is rather than as we want it to be. For instance, back when I was full-time in direct sales, I was always told that every person I meet is a prospect for my products and services, and that thinking otherwise was simply a missed opportunity. And so for a while, I busted my ass to talk to everyone and pitch everyone, until I learned the hard way that it would be far more efficient if I simply targeted the right market segment of people first. Well, duh. I mean, it doesn't make sense to waste your time selling pet products to people who don't have dogs, does it? You see, if I had actually focused on what most self-help gurus consider the negative things first, in this case, the very real fact that not everyone wanted my products and services, then I would have actually succeeded a lot faster. In fact, studies on what is called negative visualization have consistently shown that visualizing the worst possible outcomes, rather than visualizing positive ones, helps us become more proactive and plan more strategically. But focusing on the negative has even more advantages than simply this. In fact, it can help us become successful beyond our wildest dreams. For instance, let's consider something called survivorship bias. So think about all of the entrepreneurs out there who made it to that top 5%, or even the people who have achieved some other amazing goals not related to business, such as music or film. You probably believe they would be the best sources of information about how to succeed. After all, they're the ones who actually succeeded and should know what they're talking about, right? Well, not exactly. Once again, it's more useful and strategic here to train ourselves to focus on the negative, and in this case, that means examining our survivorship bias. And what is survivorship bias? Well, let's take any random sample of people who start a business, start an artistic project, start a gym routine, whatever. Now let's say only 5 to 10% of the people who started their business succeed, 5 to 10% who started that art project become a widely recognized artist, and 5 to 10% who started their gym routine actually stay consistent over 5 years and end up building a tremendous amount of lean muscle. Well, now those 5 to 10% go on to tell you the secrets to success, right? They'll recount their journey, their obstacles, and their entire process, and you'll now say, wow, if only I follow the exact steps that they took, I'll become successful. So, do you already see the problem with that kind of thinking? Well, the problem is that it's entirely possible that the remaining 90 to 95% who failed took a similar or even the exact same approach and went through all the same process and steps as that top 5 to 10%. Yet we were simply biased to listen to the top 5 to 10%. In other words, more commonly than not, we fail to consider 90 to 95% of all relevant data related to our goal. So then what's the advantage of focusing on the negative? Well, if we simply dig through all of that remaining data, we can find a treasure trove of information about what the people who didn't succeed did or did not do, what their specific circumstances were, what their attitudes were, what their decisions were at each step, and so on. And we can start to identify patterns that might end up being extremely helpful to us. Instead of thinking, what are the exact success habits or decisions I should make, why not start asking questions such as, what are the exact habits or decisions I should avoid? And if I'm starting out with my level of connections, skills, money, and so on, what is my real probability of success? Are you starting to see now how focusing on the negative could be your ultimate advantage? How can you start applying this idea to your life immediately? Well, now that we've achieved a greater degree of clarity in our thinking, let's start putting this clarity into action with our next step. Choose your classroom. So here's another negative yet helpful truth for us to accept. It's nearly impossible to make the best decision. What do I mean by this? Well, if we take a look at decision theory, which is a subset of my academic field of value theory, we see a seemingly sad reality. namely that all decision-making models are flawed. That's right, for every model in decision theory, there's some or other paradox someone has come up with along the way to show that the theory leads to absurd or even contradictory conclusions in certain cases. What's more, when scientists try to test many of these theories empirically through actual studies of human behavior, they find that people often don't actually behave in the ways these theories predict they should. Furthermore, as Brian Klaas has examined in detail in his excellent book, Fluke, Chance, Chaos, and Why Everything We Do Matters, there are so many tiny factors affecting outcomes in our lives that it becomes increasingly difficult to predict those outcomes when we do try to make the best decisions. Okay, so should we just throw up our hands and give up in that case? I mean, I'm sure making it sound like that, right? Not at all. As we'll see, once again, this is all about seeing reality as it is instead of as we want it to be. And once we accept this, we can find tremendous power. So let's explore this. What if instead of trying to always make the best decisions, we simply try to avoid making bad decisions? I mean, think about it. In many cases, it's easier to decide what we should avoid than to decide what tiny details we should be obsessing about in order to optimize the outcome. Okay, I know you want some validation from some billionaire, so you'll be happy to know this mindset of avoiding bad decisions is a core part of Warren Buffett's investing strategy also. Okay, but for real, if it's a better approach to try avoiding bad decisions, how do we go about doing so? Well, there are some really useful decision-making models out there incorporating ideas such as Occam's razor, Bayesian reasoning, and the like, many of which require lots of mathematical calculation. But let's be real. When we're in urgent situations that require split-second decisions, we don't have the time to sit there and plug values into an equation. Instead, we should learn how to rely on our intuition. And this is exactly where the principle of choosing our classroom comes in. So you probably feel like this is kind of a flimsy answer, right? I mean, intuition is unreliable. And in fact, it's completely irrational, right? But what if I told you intuition is not only a highly rational process, but that it can be trained to become more and more accurate over time? You see, neural networks, the things that power machine learning and AI and those cool robots at MIT that can do backflips, they're modeled after how our brain works. They are given some objective and then engage in what's called a forward pass in order to try their best to achieve the objective. After failing to achieve the objective, they then engage in what's called backpropagation to isolate the variable that had the biggest impact on the results. In short, neural networks keep doing this and keep adjusting until they achieve the objective. And this is very similar to how our intuitive process of learning works. And therefore, our intuition, our gut feelings about what the right decision should be in what situation, it can be trained in the same way. But why did I go through this entire explanation then? Just like I said before, we have to be able to see things the way they are, not how we want them to be. And so because our brains and our intuition work this way, there is no getting around just putting ourselves out there and making tons of mistakes, just as these machine learning systems do. When I was in direct sales, I made tons of mistakes and said and did tons of the wrong things. I mismanaged money, I failed to communicate the right things to the right people at the right times, I said things in a certain way that ended up offending people. I experienced it all. And later, when I started running my test prep agency, similar things happened. But because of those often painful experiences, today I have a tremendous number of high-income skills I wouldn't have had otherwise. But this isn't an easy process to navigate. And so if you want a free resource to help you with this, feel free to check out my life orientation guide in the pinned comment below. So what will be your classroom? Where will you deliberately choose to make your own mistakes and make a fool out of yourself? In other words, where will you choose to make what I call data collecting decisions? Decisions where you have no idea what the outcome will be, but you make them anyway so you can collect enough information to actually know what a bad decision looks like. Don't be afraid to make suboptimal decisions. Those are the ones that help us grow. But in order to achieve at the highest levels, it's not enough to simply avoid bad decisions. Instead, we have to take our last and most important step. Identify your unfair advantage and leverage your weaknesses. Ask yourself, what are your core strengths? What is your unfair advantage? Something you know or have an ability for that is either very rare or very valuable. There are some great resources out there to help you determine this, such as the book StrengthsFinder 2.0 by Tom Rath. Identifying this is so key because, let's be honest, a lot of the fields you want to become a top achiever in are already saturated with highly talented people who are already succeeding at the highest levels. But identifying our unfair advantage and then going on to leverage our weaknesses can allow us to find a hidden edge to finally break into the field we desire and at a high level. Case in point, when the entrepreneur Damon John started the clothing brand FUBU, he describes how he had to be honest with himself. He had no money to invest in a manufacturing facility and no money to invest in marketing, so the venture seemed doomed from the start. However, he strategized how to lean on his strengths, in this case being a great salesman and communicator, in order to convince manufacturing facilities to make his clothing without any investment from him. John eventually learned about manufacturing and marketing and all of the logistics in between, but in order to succeed faster, he leveraged those weaknesses. He had other people step in who were already better and more knowledgeable, and he used them as models to learn from. And how can you do the same? By taking these 3 steps, we're expanding our thinking skills, growing our brain, and training ourselves to see things as they are, rather than as we only want them to be. And when we do this, we eventually win. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact, not only on your own life, but on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.